to the sort of local flexible offices. In terms of those that are global enterprises and local businesses, really it only accounts for 10% of the businesses. As an average across the region, it's higher, up to 17% and growing. One of the factors mentioned within the feedback survey was that there's a strong traditional work culture in Vietnam, and with that probably comes an element of ownership of workplace, for example, or perception. Another fact was that 50% of those organizations did not have any sort of flexible working or an anytime, anywhere working policy. How do you see these enterprises kind of responding to the recent changes in Vietnam specifically, for example? And would you expect more businesses to take advantage of some of the flexible work options that are out there and potentially slowly change some of that sort of cultural view?
Answer would most likely be yes and no. So we did last year a similar survey where we wanted to find out whether companies are more and more open to flexible work arrangements. And what we found out is that white-collar workers or office professionals really would love to have this option. So I think we had about 80+% that yes, I believe it will help them in terms of productivity, creativity, as well in terms of well-being and happiness to have a certain flexibility, especially among Gen Y, Gen Z, but as well Gen X had a similar high percentage. On the contrary, companies, as you mentioned, Duncan, we had roughly the same percentage. 80% of companies or employers said they would prefer to have their employees in the office. So there's obviously a big gap or a difference in opinions. And so our take on it is, I believe once companies have recognized that maybe not 100% work from home, but providing certain flexibility, having flexible working hours, or either work from home policies or work not from the office policies. Once I realize that this will help with being a very attractive employer, improving happiness level, engagement level, maybe as well reducing turnover level, I think in overall making their company more successful, I'm sure companies more and more will move into that direction. But it maybe takes a few companies who advocated, who do very well this model, so then you will see more and more companies following.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot about that, which is the sort of the change management process through it all, right? Adopting different places to be able to work, adopting different considerations. Yeah, very fair point. Now this is becoming a little bit of a tagline of the new normal within workplaces. We're hearing it all the time in terms of what's going to be the new normal. I think normal is too constructed to piece this together. But I mean, one thing's clear is that it's doubtful that we're ever going back to exactly the same offices in the short-term future, and I think that's going to impact the long-term consideration of the traditional leases versus flexible leases versus a blend of both in an environment across a portfolio in different cities. So Pam, what do you think the ideal future workspace for you and your team would be like? In terms of environment, in terms of people being able to interact in an office. That's where your creativity happens. But people are a bit more remote. How would you look at that in a blend?
So Duncan, I think for Revolut, operationally, working remotely hasn't impacted business. But I would say, in the future, we will still need to gather for work. But I assume that the amount of work, amount of time we spend in proximity with with one another, and even the premise of how a work week will look like, I think it's the biggest cultural shift forward because like what Andre was saying, do we work from home? Do we work outside from office and in office? So for now, I would say the co-working space remains and continues to be the best option for us because it gives people the chance to come to the office a few times a week as needed, as well as the option to expand and scale up when the need arises. So that's what I could say.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's spot on in terms of as the need arises. I think there's going to be lots of changes that are going to be implemented. Whether it's based down to government control in terms of access to offices and professional distancing or physical distancing, as you mentioned, Andre. And I guess the same sort of question to you, Andre, because you're now back in the office in Vietnam. How's that experience been in terms of sort of reentry? And have there already been certain items that have been implemented to the new normal? And sort of what are you feeling about it, and what are your people sort of experiencing right now?
I think the first steps were all around communication. So meaning having a clear plan in place how we wanted to go back and communicating it, and as well to a certain extent repeating it a few times because people are not there face to face. So when we're communicating via virtual means, I think we need to be very careful that we're very clear in our message, because I honestly underestimated a little bit as well, because everybody has a certain different fear factor. Some are not so afraid, some are really highly afraid of coming back or what is out there. A lot of people maybe potentially living by themselves, have not left the apartment for quite a while, have as well as certain opinion about how the world out there will be. So a lot of communication, positive communication, reassurance, but of course physically in the office as well. I come back to this term physical distance, because we should not do social distancing, but really we need to create space, because we should have a certain distance between each other. If you look at most offices, people sit quite close to each other, and when they have lunch, they eat close to each other. So all this, in the beginning, we put it into phases. So not everybody returned back to work immediately. We did this in phases. We monitor the situation. Are there new infections out there in the community? For example, certain people maybe have traveled somewhere, so we ask them to stay home for 2 weeks, to monitor it. So careful approach to make everybody, even the ones who are a bit more worried, as well comfortable step by step returning back to work. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, we actually then implemented these work from home policies. These were not just, in a way, COVID-19 policies, we continue with them now. So we have, even now, where you see certain companies in Vietnam have returned with 100% of their workforce, actually, we still have a certain percentage of our workforce working from home, because we have now work from home policies. And for example, now we have it 10:30 roughly in the morning. We see in Vietnam, and we see as well certain employees actually coming in now, because we have now as well flexible working hours. So I think this as well has created a little more space in the office.